Welcome everyone to the second TheraPsil webinar of the year. Thank you very much for joining. We're just going to wait a couple minutes here for everyone to trickle in. So in the meantime, if you'd like to, please feel free to add in where you're calling in from. Last time, I think we had people all around the world and from each side of Canada. So I always love just putting in the chat, maybe where you're from. Okay, as we wait for people to trickle in as well, I just want to make a couple of housekeeping comments here. The first is, if everyone looks at the bottom there, you'll see that there's both a chat function and then also a Q&A function. What we're going to be doing today is getting as much time as possible for Q&A, as I think all of our last webinars have gone over, and we haven't been able to get to everyone's questions. So we'll leave a lot of time for questions here. Pop them in the Q&A. They all list themselves out, and that way they don't get lost in the conversation that we're having. But that being said, please feel free to also pop anything you want to say into the chat function there. So we will get started again. Thank you everyone for showing up here. If you're just trickling in now, please feel free to join everyone else and say where you're coming in from. This is the second TheraPsil webinar of the year, and today we're going to give everyone an update on the applications that some may have seen were given an intent to deny by Health Canada on January 30th. So today we've got Nicholas and Yasmeen joining, and we'll get started right after a quick land introduction here. So I want to respectfully acknowledge the fact that I'm conducting this webinar from the traditional and ancestral and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I also acknowledge that the substances that our team's advocating for, psilocybin, in a Western medical context, have been used for thousands of years by many different communities across the globe and in ceremonial purposes. So I want to honor and respect that and thank everyone who's been able to pass that knowledge along. So I will pass it over quickly to Yaz and Nicholas to give your introduction. So Yaz, why don't you introduce yourself?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Spencer. My name's Yaz. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm the Director of Training and Operations at TheraPsil. So it's been a really exciting year since I joined last March 8th. And we've just really been working on scaling our training program. And since then, we've launched 11 training cohorts and have trained 150 healthcare professionals to lead this kind of psilocybin psychotherapy in Canada. So it's been a really, really exciting time. Over the next 3 months, we're launching another 7 training cohorts. And we're seeing right now that there's such a profound need to train doctors, nurses, psychotherapists, and social workers in this kind of therapy. So we've been ramping up. And as many of you know, there is a Section 56 exemption process that we have been applying for in Canada for our healthcare professionals who are engaged in TheraPsil's training. In December 2020, we did get 19 exemptions for healthcare professionals, the first of its kind. But since then, we haven't received exemptions for a year and 2 months now. So the first exemption we put through after the 19 were granted was on March 18th, 2021. So that's 319 days ago. And on January 31st, we were sent 86 intent to refuse applications from Health Canada, stating that our 86 healthcare professionals who had completed TheraPsil's training program, the didactic portion of training, that Health Canada intended to refuse their Section 56 applications, which is absolutely crucial for them to complete training. So when we apply for Section 56 exemptions for healthcare professionals, it's so they can ingest 5 grams of psilocybin mushrooms for the experiential component of training, which in our eyes is crucial before treating any patients, so they can guide patients in a safe and effective manner. So what Health Canada said was, you've got 14 days to respond, and the reason we're intending to refuse your applications is because there are clinical trials that are available to you. That being said, TheraPsil was given no information on the clinical trial, and through a bit of sleuthing, we found that the clinical trial is set to likely begin in 6 months, and we've also heard, it could not be true, but we've heard that there's only 20 people, an N of 20 for this clinical trial, making it completely inaccessible for the 86 healthcare professionals that had applied for their exemptions. On top of that, we have trained 150 folks now, and we've applied for exemptions on their behalf. And with our training program growing, in the next 3 months, we should have about 220 healthcare professionals who need to complete their experiential training. So to say the least, there was a lot of outrage on behalf of our healthcare professionals. And therefore, that's why we've retained Nicholas Pope, our lawyer who's on this call, to represent our healthcare professionals. So I'll pass it over to you, Nicholas, to state what this process has looked like so far and what these submissions will look like to Health Canada.
Thanks, Yaz. So as she mentioned, my name is Nicholas, pronouns he, him. I'm a human rights lawyer at Hameed Law in Ottawa. And I practice primarily in the area of administrative law, which is the area of review of government decisions, making sure their decisions are right and reasonable and procedurally fair and compliant with the charter. So we're putting together right now submissions to Health Canada. And these submissions, they're due on the 28th. They were initially due for 14 days, but we received an extra 14-day extension because Health Canada hadn't provided us with any information about this clinical trial. We're still waiting for that information, and hopefully it will come soon. But the process that will go forward from here is we'll make these submissions. There's a lot of evidence and some legal argument that's going to go into it. And in very brief, the submission will be that patients have a Section 7 under the Charter right to life, liberty, and security of person, and that is violated by not having access to medical treatment that they need. And going along with that, the patients can't get this medical treatment if there are not enough healthcare practitioners to support them. So that's essentially the submission that we'll be making, and we'll get that in by the 28th. And then at that point, Health Canada will have a decision to make. They'll have to review all of the evidence. It could take some time, but they'll review it and then they'll come back with a final decision. If it's approved, then these 86 people will get their exemptions and all will be well. But if it's not approved, then we will look at the decision itself and see what reasons are given. But likely, regardless of the reasons of the decision, although they will matter, if they are denied, we'll have a strong case to move forward and have the decision reviewed by the federal court. Now, the federal court, it'll be a whole proceeding that will go on. It may take a matter of months, maybe a year, possibly more. It sort of depends on exactly all the steps that go into it. But at the end of this proceeding, a judge will typically, in this area of law, either agree with the decision maker, say it's reasonable and uphold it, or they will overturn it and send it back for a redecision. Now, if we bring this forward to the court, we will ask for something as well called mandamus, which can be granted in certain circumstances where the court will say, will not send it back to the decision maker, but will say you have to decide it in a certain way, and we'll ask for explicit approvals. This is fairly rare, but there's certain precedent for it specifically in this situation. There's the 2011 Insight case with the safe injection site in Vancouver, where it was a very similar situation, and the Supreme Court there ordered the minister to give the exemption to Insight in Vancouver. And that's essentially the basis that we'd be bringing forward this legal case on, and we'll see what happens there. I will mention one other thing that I acted on behalf of, well, with the guidance of TheraPsil's, but on behalf of Nathan Kroljak this last summer and fall in a case that we brought forward, also requesting mandamus. But in that case, it was just mandamus for a decision to be rendered, because as you may know, a lot of people, a lot of patients as well, requesting Section 56 exemptions have been waiting a very long time. And so with this one individual, we brought forward a case for trying to compel the government to actually render a decision in that case. They fought it all the way up until 2 days before the hearing. And then 2 days before the hearing, they granted him his exemption. And so we didn't actually hold the hearing. But It has shown that so far, legal cases have worked at putting pressure on the government. We haven't had to go all the way to a hearing yet. The last one got very, very close, but it's shown that when we put this pressure on, results tend to happen that weren't happening just by political advocacy alone.
Very much, Nicholas, and thank you, Yaz, too. So I now want to comment a bit on some of the conversations that we've been having through our Compassionate Access Committee, along with conversations with healthcare practitioners and members of Parliament. For those on the call that are unfamiliar with where TheraPsil began, and I think it was mentioned both from Yaz and Nicholas, we've been supporting patients and healthcare practitioners for about 2 years now. And our advocacy really started in August of 2020, when we were able to support the first 4 patients with getting access to psilocybin on compassionate grounds from a Section 56 request to the Honourable Minister Patty Hajdu at the time. So this was a request to the minister, not necessarily to Health Canada, to seek exemption for these patients. And the reason I distinguish between the minister and Health Canada is that the Minister of Health is accountable to voters and to Canadians, whereas many oftentimes bureaucrats are not exactly accountable to anyone. And we really see this as a point of stress and distress from the healthcare practitioners and patients who find themselves messaging and speaking with bureaucrats instead of necessarily the minister who's able to make this decision. So today, just as we did in August of 2020, as we did in December of 2020, and as we have over the last year in 2021, we are appealing to the Minister of Health, who today is Jean-Yves Duclos. And it is Jean-Yves that has the power to make these decisions, to render decisions for the 150 healthcare practitioners, along with the patients who are still currently waiting for access. Now, part of the stress from speaking with patients and healthcare practitioners is for some of them, some of the healthcare practitioners that have been supporting patients, this has been going on for 2 years. For some of those healthcare practitioners, they've been waiting for exemptions for about 300 days. And the truth is that they understand that this affects more than just them. In our waiting list, we have about 1,500 patients who are seeking support from trained healthcare practitioners. And this decision makes it increasingly difficult for those healthcare practitioners to become confident and well-trained with psilocybin so that they can go on to help those patients. So we really do want to shed a light on how many people this is affecting. And that is part of what we're trying to put together as part of this case, to show that there are many Canadians who are depending on this decision so that they have access to trained healthcare practitioners. I also want to mention too that in the past, and I think this is important to highlight, is in the past, 19 healthcare practitioners have been granted this access, again, from the former minister, Patty Hajdu. And so what we're asking here is that there is a level of equality among healthcare practitioners, and that what has been granted, and more or less a precedent that has been set for some, is also given to the 150 healthcare practitioners who are asking for the exact same exemption and to use psilocybin and that exemption in a very similar training program that we've developed. The final thing that I would like to mention here is that the rationale part of, or the rationale that Health Canada has given TheraPsil, that a clinical trial is to be the only route to access psilocybin. I do want to make it clear that as a group, we've determined that we are in no way against clinical trials. We think that clinical trials are a very meaningful and necessary way in order to move drugs into market in Canada. And even in the instance of training, we believe that the option should not be either or, but both. And that healthcare practitioners should have the option to do clinical trials, and we should always be doing research to test whether or not psilocybin, for example, to be used in a training context is helpful and provides positive patient outcomes. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we are looking at this as an issue of compassionate access and acting on grounds of compassion. And those grounds of compassion necessitate sometimes us to move outside of the standard that we would use, such as clinical trials. And that is the reason that the first 19 exemptions were granted. It's the reason that about 70 patients have been given access to psilocybin today. And it is the basis of this request as well, is that the government act compassionately and allow healthcare practitioners to take a risk and to use psilocybin in training context. So with that being said, Yaz, is there anything else that you wanted to add from conversations that you've had with training or with the trainees that you'd like to add to this? Because what I do want to do is make sure that we have a lot of time for questions to come in, as I know that we've missed questions in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Where to begin? I feel like all of my conversations over the last 3 weeks have been with healthcare professionals, but I think most importantly, I just want to say thank you to healthcare professionals who've been advocating with us by writing letters, by creating advocacy videos, by reaching out and asking how they can support. I feel like we've never been in a point where we've had so much advocacy material coming in, and that's what makes a difference. So to those who've sent their advocacy videos in, their letters in, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Health Canada does listen to healthcare professionals. They are not going to go to a court hearing with 150 doctors, nurses, and psychotherapists. It would just be cruel. So having your voice amplified is crucial. And I just wanted to add that this intent to refuse was given to the 19 healthcare professionals who were granted their exemptions originally in December 2020. They were given that same intent to refuse and the time to respond for 2 weeks. And what we did as an organization is we advocated. So for anyone on this call who wants to get involved with advocacy and wants to create a letter or a video, please reach out to me. I'll pop my email in the chat after. And we really, over the next, because we're responding on the 28th, it doesn't mean a decision is going to be made on the 28th. I think it's actually going to take likely a few months for them to get back to us. So over the next 90 or so days, we want a video going out every single day. So if you have the capacity to create a 30-second video, maybe 2 minutes, we can send you a script, we can send you the guidelines, and we would just love to have you fight with us and join these advocacy initiatives. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Yaz. And I definitely want to echo that sentiment, is that this is the third time that we've been through this process of advocating for change, whether it be the first initial exemptions for patients, the exemptions for healthcare practitioners, or earlier last year, an exemption for non-palliative patients, which is a case that Nicholas helped on. And I want to make it clear that the Minister of Health, in every single one of those circumstances, jumped in and was able to save us from having to go to a court hearing by granting the exemptions. So I think what this process is showing that progress is needed when it comes to access to psilocybin, and that we're not going to shy away from a fight if that's what it comes down to, because we really are dealing with human lives here. In the past, we have had people pass away before they were able to get access to psilocybin, and I think this is just a statement that we can't wait any longer. The healthcare practitioners can't wait any longer. And at this point, it is necessary, after waiting for 300 days, to move towards court action. But again, I'm incredibly optimistic, more optimistic than ever, that the Minister of Health is going to step up and do the right thing. So in the chat function here, I added just a couple of comments ago that there is a tool on our website that you can use to actually message your MP. And you can also email our Director of Communications, Holly at TheraPsil.ca, if you'd like to put together those videos, because those videos and messaging your MP is the way that we get things done in Canada, in a democracy. Your votes and your messages to the members of Parliament who are there to support the will and the needs of Canadians, they really do move mountains. And in the past, we've had incredible support from folks like Hetty Fry, from Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, Dr. Marcus Pulowski, Alistair McGregor, Laurel Collins, Elizabeth May, Ken Hardy. I'm probably missing a few, but so many MPs have stepped up, and they're able to message the Minister of Health, as the Minister of Health, Jeannick Duclos, is a fellow MP, and able to advocate for what they think is right. And in this instance, we have a pretty good case. So something else that I do want to add here that I think everyone should feel free to look at and share is the list of letters from experts. So I've just put that again into the chat. We've been incredibly fortunate to have so many people both working with us to message experts such as Roland Griffiths, Rick Doblin from MAPS, Robin Card Harris, Janice Phelps, seeking these letters, which ultimately, these are the folks that in the courts, we may have to go back to seek expert statements from, showing that there is an effectiveness of psilocybin, that psilocybin is safe, and that using psilocybin in training is the best way to treat patients. So giving Health Canada all of this material and showing that the experts are in support of training is incredibly helpful. And it looks like, it's like, Holly, there's some issues, people seeing the chat. So we'll make sure that we send out all of these letters. If you can't see the chat function, or if you can't see the expert letters, we'll make sure that those are highlighted in an email to everyone who joined this webinar. The final thing I do want to mention is that we are and have today just launched our fundraiser. So again, in the chat function, I'm just going to add our fundraiser. Over the last 2 years, we have been able to operate TheraPsil completely off of donations from both companies and philanthropists and donors. And those funds have gone to past legal challenges, and successful ones at that, and are the reason that we've been able to, as a team, advocate for patients. There's a ton of work that goes into patient intake. Our director of intake, Natasha Fernley, has been working tirelessly for about 2 years to manage these patients as we connect them with therapists, doctors, and put together Section 56s. Yasmeen's been able to put together the entire training program off of a wonderful donation from the Nikan Foundation, from a number of other donors. And every day that Holly's out there putting together communications and working with people, this whole operation is operating off of donations. So we are seeking over the next 30 days to get together $100,000 so that we can push this case forward, and then also put together the necessary communications and lobbying to make sure that this issue does not get swept under the rug and that Canadians are not left in the dark without access to psilocybin. Because the only alternative, if healthcare practitioners aren't able to get trained, is patients will not be able to access psilocybin through Section 56 or the SAP, and they will be forced underground. So what we're trying to do is shed light on this situation here, on the plight of Canadians who are asking for compassionate access and being denied. So if you're able to support, it's, I think, day one, and we're about 1% there. All it really takes is about 1,000 people to give, $100, and we're able to hit this goal. So please keep your eye out for that. If you can donate, please do. And if you know anyone else who can, or if you think you can share this, please help us out by sharing it. So I think I want to end it there on the commentary piece from Nicholas and Yaz, unless you have anything else you want to add here, in which case go ahead. But otherwise, I will just jump into the Q&A function. As in the past, as I mentioned, we've come up short on the question period. So I'm giving us today an entire half hour. And if we're able to get through all of those questions and end early, then even better, we can give everyone their afternoon back. So thank you, everyone. And if there are any questions, please feel free to throw those in Q&A chat again. The Q&A at the bottom right, you should see that there's about 6 questions. That way I can make sure I get to them. So the first one, if successful, would this mean that approvals for the 86 professionals only, or would it set a precedent for moving forward with all others who would want to apply? Nicholas, would you be able to shed some light on this?
Yeah, sort of both. So it would mean only an approval for those people who challenge the decision. And it may not be that all 86 challenge the decision. Each one of them has to decide whether they want to be part of any court application. But the order from the court would directly say these ones must be either overturned or approved. And then it would set a precedent for future cases. It's questionable sometimes whether the government then follows that precedent. I would not expect them not to follow the precedent, though. But there can be situations, like let's say, if another real channel came up for a real pathway for healthcare practitioners to get legal access to psilocybin, then perhaps they could say it's a different situation later on and not approve them. But generally, if the situation was to remain generally the same, then it would set that precedent.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. And yeah, that's what we've seen over the past year or the past 2 years, is that as we set precedent, it doesn't always make it easy for everyone else to get access, but that is what we see. So the first example being palliative patients. After the first 4 exemptions, palliative patients were able to get access to psilocybin. We were able to expand that to non-palliative patients who had been in remission for cancer. And then we were able to further push that. And as of today, we're able to get access for people who've never had cancer with treatment-resistant depression. And we're very, I think the future is looking very optimistic to a number of other patients who have requests out to use psilocybin for opioid use disorder, to use it for cluster headaches, as well as post-traumatic stress disorder. So we have seen those precedents work in the past, but I think as Nicholas said, it's never certain. So our goal and our objective remains to make or to move towards regulations. And what seems to be brewing in the background is that after 2 years, we may need to ramp up our court argument a bit more if things don't move forward. So we are hoping to put together a larger legal challenge as well for access. And I think that flows directly into the next question here, which is asking about the special access program and if it helps with professional training at all. And that is where it ties in is if we're able to get access to psilocybin through Section 56, the SAP would not allow for healthcare practitioners to access a GMP product through the SAP to use in their training context, nor would using specifically the SAP work for allowing healthcare practitioners access for training. So the SAP Special Access Program is used or has in the past been used to get people access to emergency drugs that are usually past, phase 1, 2, or 3 clinical trials in other countries, and most normally are actually approved in other countries. So an example might be getting someone access to a cancer drug that's not available in Canada. Now, some recent changes were made to the SAP to allow restricted drugs such as psilocybin, MDMA, and a number of other stimulants and opioids, allow access to those. But our position has been and still is that it is an insufficient regulatory pathway for Canadians to get access to psilocybin. It's been about a month and a half since these changes were made on, I think it was January 5th. And we've got a number of doctors working on it, and we've still been unable to get patients access to psilocybin through the SAP. And this was after Health Canada said that there would be a quick 24 to 48 hour turnaround on all requests. So as far as we can tell, it doesn't really matter what they say they're doing. By all means, the SAP is not allowing patients access to psilocybin. And part of the problem there is that Health Canada is still the one deciding whether or not someone qualifies for our SAP. And they also determine which product is available through SAP. So what we do need is to move beyond that to some sort of regulatory pathway where both healthcare practitioners and patients can access the GMP psilocybin that's being produced in Canada, because there are many producers. And we also don't want them waiting too long. And that is part of the whole problem here, is that patients and healthcare practitioners in many cases are waiting sometimes up to 300 days to get access to medicine. And that's just too long. I've got another one maybe for you, Yaz. Where are the people on the wait list? And I'll just extend this to both healthcare practitioners and patients. So we've got a wait list of about 1,500 patients and about 1,000 healthcare practitioners. Where are they from? And I'll even include maybe what are some of their professions? What type of healthcare practitioners are asking to join this program?
Yeah, so I can speak from a healthcare professional standpoint. We've got 1,150 healthcare professionals on our wait list currently. A lot of it is from our communications and advocacy work that has come through. People have heard about TheraPsil through the other 11 training cohorts that we have launched, lots of word of mouth. In terms of people we're accepting into our programs right now, medical doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, nurses, registered clinical counselors. So folks with a medical background or psychotherapy background. To date, we have launched 11 training cohorts across Canada for our patients to get access Canada-wide. We are currently expanding that. We, of course, have hosted the majority of our training cohorts in Vancouver to date and Victoria as well, but we have expanded to Northern Ontario, Toronto, Montreal, as well as the Maritimes. And that's just because when this access expands, as more Section 56 exemptions and if not regulations come through, we're going to see a huge influx of patients looking for this care, and we want to be prepared so they're supported in a safe and effective manner. And that's what's so crucial about this all. This is why we want training. We want the patients to not have a bad experience. And we've heard, I think all of us have heard of so many instances of malpractice, and that's what we want to avoid at all cost. When you go into a psilocybin experience, you are very vulnerable. There's lots that's happening in this therapeutic setting. There's lots that you're going to want to integrate after, and to have trained professionals who have had their experience for themselves is absolutely crucial. So we are hearing right now, because of those 8 patients who were sent a refusal after the SAP came into place, I've heard of a couple of patients who are going underground, and that's the last thing we want. So that's where folks are coming from on our healthcare professional waiting list. Spencer, do you want to speak to where people are coming from the patient wait list?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just looked at one of the lists. They're coming from all over the world, some of them, but the ones that are in Canada, the 1,500, it's very heavy in BC, Alberta, Ontario, and then quite a few in Manitoba, Quebec, New Brunswick, PEI, we've got a few as well, Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan, and then a couple of the territories too, so in the Yukon. So it's very, like, we have many people in just about every province and territory, but a vast majority of them are here in BC and in Ontario, and that's where, and on the East Coast, and that's where a majority of the healthcare practitioners are also supporting from. So yeah, it's spot on. Is the way we've designed the program and where we're choosing to train people is where the patient load is heaviest. So it does match up quite a bit. And we're trying to make sure that there are healthcare practitioners close to those patients, as you know, it's kind of unacceptable for patients to be flying across Canada in order to get access to psilocybin. And that is what we've had to do in the past. And that leads us to answer the question from Thomas Hurdle here. So Thomas, I see you've asked a question, a loaded one at that. Has anyone with an expired exemption, so anyone who's had an exemption, and I'll comment that the exemptions are good for a year, received a renewal? And the answer to that is no, they haven't. So I know in Thomas's case, we've been advocating for him to get access to psilocybin for a number of months now, and he's now actually been waiting longer to get his exemption granted again for year 2 after psilocybin has been deemed incredibly effective than he waited in the first place. So you know, that really is a big issue as well, is that we now have a case of, you know, someone who's used psilocybin. It's been incredibly effective in managing anxiety and end of life distress, and now those same people who with their doctor, therapist, have shown, you know, and taken the necessary tests to show how their anxiety is decreased, are now being told that they can't get access again. So it is a problem, and whether or not it's a mistake or just a limitation of the Section 56 process, we don't know. But again, these are the things that we hope to bring up in the court process, because right now there's just too many issues, too many patients and healthcare practitioners who have been waiting too long for access. Okay, I've got another one. Are you able to share more about the clinical trial they referenced? Just curious to know where that clinical trial is taking place or how it is that the federal government knew about it publicly. Can you clarify? So we don't know too much about the clinical trial. I know it's a trial that ATMA's put together, and that's awesome. I think we're very supportive of it. It seems to be testing the safety and efficacy of psilocybin in a training setting. We don't know where it's taking place, however, yet. We've requested that information and not received anything, and we don't know for how many people it is going to be available. So we definitely support it, and we've made it clear to the healthcare practitioners on our list that anyone who would like to join that, we'd love to be able to support them and see what we can do to help them access it. And the government would know about it because they have, I believe they've written a letter of no objection, so that clinical trial does seem cleared to take place. Again, what I will clarify, however, and this was well documented in a letter that Numinous actually helped in support of these patients and healthcare practitioners, is that, and I think this came from someone from the UBC Research Ethics Board, is that in the US, they have a NIH ethics review policy that essentially outlines and stipulates some of the ethics behind asking for clinical trials and when it's appropriate. And there are certain circumstances where it's actually unethical to push for a clinical trial to be the only option to access medicine, specifically when there may not be enough time or resources, or when a specific research question is already known. And that is part of what we're arguing here, is that we already know that psilocybin is safe and effective. And so we don't believe that it's absolutely necessary, specifically with past precedent, to force healthcare practitioners into a clinical trial when there are other available options and when those other options have been granted in the past, such as Section 56 access.
And I think most importantly is the clinical trial, as Spencer said, we're in full support of it, but we have patients who are waiting on trained healthcare professionals. And from the article, this clinical trial is starting in 6 months, and that's 6 months too late. We're actually 350 days too late at this point, and to add another 6 months to have more trained healthcare professionals, it's just not enough, and it's too little too late.
Yep, it's a good point. Yeah, I think it's important to always reaffirm that we are talking about patients here and people's lives, and people who are in urgent need of access. So thank you for that. Okay, so the next question here is, do you think the government is more worried about the data being withheld in this process by private clinics, or the after effects of psilocybin trips of their people? So I'm not exactly, do you understand that question, Yas? Good, I'm gonna read it one more time. I think the government is more worried about the data being withheld in this process by private clinics or after effect of psilocybin trips, or the effects of psilocybin trips on people. So I'll just try and answer more broadly. I don't think anyone's too worried about private data being held by clinics. I think there is quite a bit of research going on right now, and I think all research is positive. Most of that research is being made public. So I don't think that we're too worried about clinics or private clinics hiding data. I think that, and I'm happy to say that from what we've seen and experienced, a lot of people are interested in sharing data and sharing and making the science available. I know the research that we're doing as well is all open science, and I've seen many other groups promise similar things, so open science. And then as for the effects of psilocybin trips on healthcare practitioners, whether or not the government is worried about the effects of psilocybin trips, I do want to make it clear that the entire argument for psilocybin to be used in a medical context here with healthcare practitioners is we want to reduce that risk, because the alternative is patients and healthcare practitioners going underground to get access to psilocybin, both for treatment, for training, and that is exactly what we want to change. So we do have a clinical protocol both for training and for treatment, And the entire design of that clinical protocol is modeled after the clinical protocols that have been used at UCLA, NYU, and Johns Hopkins to reduce risk. So I think, again, this is where we need to look at why this is a better alternative to not granting access. Okay, let's see, we're getting lots of these. So does TheraPsil see the bulk rejection of Section 56 exemptions by Health Canada to be a direct result of the SAP amendments? Yaz or Nicholas, feel free to jump in there.
Yeah, I can jump in, and then Nicholas as well. For the patients, absolutely. There was eight rejections sent after the SAP came. So any applications that were filed after January 5th, yes, I think it's a direct result of the SAP. They'd like people to apply through the SAP program first, and then if they get denied, then the Section 56 exemption process. In terms of healthcare professionals, I think the reason for denial is because they are justifying that a clinical trial is set to take place, and the government loves research and clinical trials, and that's where they're always trying to push folks. But what we need, and what I'm hoping to clarify from Health Canada, is whether our healthcare professionals will even fit into that clinical trial. Because if there's not enough, if there's only a certain amount of spots, if there's not multiple sites where testing can occur, we can't expect people from Ontario to fly in to Alberta. The timing of it, we need more details to see if it will apply to our healthcare professionals. But I think most importantly, we've got 150 folks who have completed our didactic portion of training. And if it is a small number of participants, such as 20 to 30, we won't be eligible to participate.
Thanks, Yaz. And something else I'll just comment on, which is a real, kind of catch-22 here, is the SAP is more prescriptive than Section 56. So it really is a healthcare practitioner supporting a patient's use of psilocybin, and to be, directly accountable and responsible for all use there. And it is, a bit different than Section 56, which is more about a patient and the minister, right? A patient asking for the right to use it. So we will still follow the same clinical processes, but part of the problem with SAP is what healthcare practitioners are going to be strongly advocating for the use of psilocybin with their patient if they have not been trained in that modality yet. And that is an issue here, is that in every single modality of psychotherapy, and therapy for that matter, too, massage, cognitive behavioral therapy, internal family systems, hypnotherapy, anything like that, a therapist is always going to be a subject of that therapy before they are providing it to a patient. That is the best practices, and it's made that way on purpose. Least of all is so you can have empathy for your patient, but most importantly, so that what you're doing is actually effective, so that you understand it and are able to provide it safely. So that is what we're asking here for, is that the only way forward with SAP would be granting Section 56 exemptions for healthcare practitioners. And the fact that we would have to run a clinical trial to see if training makes people better therapists, I'll just say it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Okay, so the next question here is do you have any idea of how many SAP applications have been submitted to Health Canada this far? Unfortunately, I do not, nor do I think anybody would unless they asked Health Canada. And I'm not sure Health Canada is even at liberty to share that, but perhaps. So, sorry, I can't answer that. Here's a question, and I'll direct this one at Yaz. How can I help the cause right now? What's the best thing I can do?
Yeah, thank you. I think, as we mentioned at the start of the call, the biggest way to help us right now is advocacy. So if you know any experts in the space who are willing to write a letter for us, Holly's created a beautiful template for us that you can send to the expert that you know, such as Roland Griffiths, who we received a letter from, David Nutt, folks like that who are true experts in the field. So you can reach out to me. I can send you a template. Another way to advocate is by videos. We're trying to post one every single day for the next 90 to 100 days because we know Health Canada listens to healthcare professionals. Number 3, that Take Action advocacy tool takes 30 seconds. You can write a letter to your MP. Having MP voices heard is extremely crucial, and Spencer has created a letter of support from several MPs. If your MP wants to engage with us and wants to sign this letter of support going directly to Health Canada, please introduce us. We'd be super grateful, and we can hop on a call with your MP and yourself to see if they're able to support. Number 4 is we've got another letter that you can send directly to Health Canada in support of your peers. So if you are a healthcare professional in the space, you can send a letter that we've templated. It's super easy. You just write your name and your profession, and just that, you know, you're in support of your 86 peers who've received this intent to refuse, and that you think they too should be granted same rights that the 19 healthcare professionals were granted back in December 2020. And then finally, we did launch a fundraiser today. We are a nonprofit. So if you can donate, if you can share our fundraiser wide, if everyone donates $100, we can get to 100K. And we're really trying to push for that in the next 30 days because we rely solely on donations from our supporters. So I think that's all the main ways to advocate and support our organization right now.
And I'll just add in there from a question from Michelle asking if the healthcare practitioners on the waiting list should be applying for exemptions ahead of time. I'll say that we will reach out to you, hopefully in the next week or 2 regarding that and the possibility of voicing the fact that you will be applying for an exemption to Health Canada to make it clear that we do have, I think this is part of the problem, is making it very clear that we actually do have a waiting list of over 1,000 healthcare practitioners who are seeking this training. So, you know, obviously what we would like is regulations that stipulate that if you want to use psilocybin for training purposes, you already have this exemption. And there is the possibility of a class or group exemption, such as the one that was granted for healthcare practitioners to transport psilocybin through the SAP. So this is possible. Really, anything is possible here. And Michelle, we will definitely be reaching out because your voice as a potential trainee is incredibly important. So another just quick question, and we'll try and wrap up here as we've got just a few minutes left. Is there a concern that the people might complete the training and not have the opportunity to have an experiential piece? How are all these trainees going to get the experiential piece in a timely fashion? So Yas, maybe you can speak to the experiential sessions that we've already done, and then how we would plan to roll out the remaining.
Absolutely. So we are a patient-first advocacy group. So we are going to see where the patients are if we get these exemptions, and we are going to do the experiential sessions for folks where the most patients are first. Yes, it's going to take a bit of juggling in terms of timing. The retreats are 4 days, and we know everyone's super busy. We're going to try and give everyone as much notice as possible. And we've already begun the preparation work in our training. So everyone in our training is partnered in dyads or triads, and they've begun that preparation work. So phase 1 is done. Next will be the experiential session and then integration. So firstly, we'll follow patients, and luckily we've got 5 trainers at TheraPsil, and so we can have a few retreats going at the same time. For example, Bruce Tobin led our Victoria training cohort. Dave has led one in the Maritimes, as well as several others. Human has led one in Montreal. So we could actually have 3 retreats going at the exact same weekend. We'll just need training assistants who can support, but I'm very, very confident that we can rely on our community to make this happen. And yeah, there's other folks who have been training, who've been challenging Module 11, who previously have had their own psilocybin experience, so we can support these patients.
Yes. Okay, another question here real quick. Is they're wondering, are there any patients or MPs that have contacted TheraPsil or worked with TheraPsil internationally I'll answer that quick, is yes, we've been working with a number of different international groups, such as MindMed Australia. We've been working with groups in New Zealand, Czech Republic, and drug science, as well as some groups in the United States too. So there's a ton of international movement here. And a lot of those letters from experts have come from internationally, where there's quite a bit of research going on. Another question too is, has there been public support by MPs and MLAs from all provinces and territories? The answer is not yet all provinces and territories, but we do have patients in just about all provinces and one of the territories. So our hope is that we'll continue to follow up with the MPs of those constituents, because I think it is important to show that, you know, everywhere in Canada, there are people who are using psilocybin and are looking for support. More of a comment from Ian here, but Ian comments that we need to consider the psychology and motives of the new minister, who is an economist and does theses on tax policy, and may not, you know, our stories may not be as moving and have the same impact on Jean-Yves. And, you know, Ian, in all honesty, where I believe is good thing is that at least Jean-Yves does have a heart and is a compassionate person. And I think this is why we've tried to appeal so much to the Minister of Health, you know, a real person who has the power and authority to grant these exemptions. And that is in contrast to bureaucracies, which I think we all know are sometimes all too far removed from the people that they serve to, or that they're aimed at serving. So that is part of the problem here, is that at the end of the day, you know, I encourage all of us to make sure that we know who it is who is denying these exemptions and who it is who has the power to grant them. And that is the Honorable Jean-Yves Duclos. And I really, really do believe, and say it with a smile and a full heart, that if we're able to get this message to Jean-Yves and show that this is an issue, I really do believe that he will do the right thing and support the Canadians who need his support. I really do believe that. And then the last question here. Is there any point in providing brief education to more healthcare practitioners so they can at least understand why they might submit an SAP to their patient for psilocybin as a temporary way to improve access until there is a real solution? And I'll put that over to Yaz. I think we're working on something exactly like that.
Yeah, so myself and the training committee absolutely see the need to expand our training offerings. Holly and Natasha, as well as our clinical pharmacist, Jag Joel, and our board member and TheraPsil's associate, Val Masuda, are working on a prescriber in-service regarding the SAP and how to get involved. It's just whether these doctors want to get involved, and that's why we're working on a 45-minute training for physicians so they can be informed about psilocybin therapy, because as we know, doctors are extremely busy, and taking a full week off work from 9 to 5 is often not doable for a lot of physicians. It has been doable for some, and we're super grateful to have them attend and to have their wisdom and knowledge, but we want it to be more accessible for physicians and NPs, because they are the ones who are able to prescribe through the SAP process. So that's something we're working on. Something else we're working on is just more of a 2-day intensive informational session for folks who want to know about psilocybin assisted psychotherapy, or who perhaps want to be a co-sitter and not the primary sitter. So that's a few things you're going to see rolling out over the next little bit. Stay tuned for the prescriber in service, because I can see that rolling out in the next 2 or so months, hopefully sooner, but I don't want to promise an unrealistic timeline. So you can see that coming your way.
The last question here is, has TheraPsil explored conducting its own clinical trials specifically for experiential training? Most recurring trials seem to have inclusion criteria requiring specific conditions that trainees may not meet. And the truth is, we have looked into it, and we continue to look into clinical trials. Part of the problem is and has been that the patients that we are first and foremost interested in supporting, they can't wait for these clinical trials. So there is this kind of, cart before the horse, or chicken or the egg issue, where we believe and we support clinical trials that are going on. We've consistently had funding options open for people to support clinical trials. As a nonprofit, it's hard for us to come up with the necessary funds to run one. So we will always be open to clinical trials. Anyone listening on this call or anyone would like to support that, we would absolutely love that if you're interested in helping out. But the truth being told, and back to what Yaz was saying, is that as of today, there's no clinical trial we could run soon enough, fast enough to support the number of patients we have. So we need to make sure that we're looking into both clinical trials and compassionate access. Looks like we had one more question come in. So may I give my email address to be contacted once the 45-minute ed video for physicians is available? Absolutely. Yeah, we will make that available to everyone. We've got a big list of everyone who signs up for these webinars. We'll make sure that those videos go out to anyone who is a doctor, therapist. Yaz, feel free to add anything to that.
Yeah, more importantly, please join our training waitlist, TheraPsil.ca/training. And we'll be contacting everyone on there regarding future trainings. For folks who, I just want to put this out there because I know it's a question. Why am I not being contacted? There are almost 1,200 people on our waitlist. So in fairness to everyone, I go through it based on order of sign up. For prescriber in trainings, it's going to be much more scalable because it's not going to be in person per se. It's going to be via Zoom likely. Perhaps there will be in-person sessions, but we'll be able to scale at a much quicker rate for those services.
Okay, I also want to wrap it up there. We're at time. So thank you so much, Nicholas, for joining in, and thanks for all the work you're doing to support the healthcare practitioners and patients and the work you've done over the last year. Really appreciate your time. Yaz, thank you so much for everything you're doing as the training director. It's awesome. Really happy with everyone we're getting trained here, and I'm incredibly optimistic that this campaign we're pushing forward is going to work. And most importantly, thank you everyone who showed up to this meeting and continues to show up to these meetings and advocate. Again, really, if there's anything that I could ask of you, is to use the pen and paper and email and make sure that those MPs are getting the letters and support from Canadians to support their fellow Canadians who are in need of psilocybin access. And if it's possible to, please consider donating so that we're able to fully fund a legal challenge and continue with the communications to the Minister of Health. We really want to make sure that this gets wrapped up quickly, as for many patients and healthcare practitioners, it's coming on a year now. And if we can do this the way we have, the last 3 times, I'm pretty confident that we'll get this wrapped up much sooner than later. So that's our hope. So again, thank you all very much for coming to this webinar. I hope to see you all in about a month's time at the next one. And please feel free to reach out anytime, share those videos, and continue to like us and share our tweets on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So thank you all so much. Take care.